Hello everybody and welcome back to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name is Martin and today we have an epic battle between a captain from the plane of Theros, a commander of the Gilt-Leaf Elves, a former member of the most powerful military force in Ikoria, and a man who tells children's stories. Magic sure has some weird mashups sometimes. But before we begin, I'd like to personally thank all of our absolutely amazing patrons listed on screen for their heartwarming generosity. We wouldn't be able to continue making videos such as these without your support, so thank you. Also, if you decide to make a purchase from any of these websites, then be sure to do so via our affiliate links in the video description. It won't cost you anything extra, but it really helps out the channel. And if you haven't already, then go and check out altersleeves.com, where you can find thousands of super cool designs on perfect fit sleeves to really bling out your decks. Just be sure to quote us as the ones who sent you. But that's enough of that, let's take a look at those opening hands. I am playing my Siona, Captain of the Pyleus deck, which runs a heckload of auras and aura support. The deck also runs a sneaky mill sub-theme which nobody ever sees coming in a Selesnya deck. My opening hand contains Altar of the Brood, Sol Ring, Dreampod Druid, Season of Growth, Idyllic Tutor, Crozen Verge, and the Plains.
I am playing my Trynn, Champion of Freedom, and Silvar Devourer of the Free human tribal deck. The deck also contains a healthy amount of cards that like it when I sacrifice things, and can even become a Voltron style deck when necessary. I keep an opening hand consisting of Sol Ring, Oars of Signet, General Kudro of Drannith, Chromatic Lantern, Godless Shrine, Marsh Flats, and Rugged Prairie.
Ruben is playing his Nath of the Gilt-Leaf Elf tribal deck, which also runs a decent number of cards that make his opponents discard. He is also running a fair amount of removal cards, ensuring that his army of elves can attack unimpeded. Ruben keeps a starting hand of Delirium Skeins, Occam Adversary, Asceticism, Evolving Wilds, Path of Ancestry, a Swamp, and a Forest.
And finally, Phil is playing his Chulane Teller of Tales Good Stuff deck, with the sole purpose of getting as much value out of each of his cards as physically possible. He is running an ungodly amount of mana dorks, as well as a ton of low mana value creatures, which he plans on using to trigger his commander's ability as many times as he can. Phil keeps an opening hand of Findhorn Elves, Llanowar Elves, Phantasmal Image, Return to Dust, Seaside Citadel, Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, and a Snow-Covered Forest. Phil wins the die roll and starts things off by playing Seaside Citadel. With nothing more to do, he passes to Martin.
I play a Plains and cast Sol Ring. I then tap the ring to cast Altar of the Brood and pass the turn.
I play Rugged Prairie and cast a Sol Ring of my own. Next I cast Oars of Signet and end my turn.
Ruben plays Path of Ancestry and passes to Phil.
Phil plays a really pretty Bountiful Promenade and taps out to cast Llanowar Elves and Findhorn Elves. Out of mana, he passes the turn.
I play Slippery Cast, causing everybody else to mill one of my Altar of the Brood. Next I cast Idyllic Tutor, searching my library for Shielded by Faith and put the enchantment into my hand. With nothing more to do, I end my turn.
I play Godless Shrine, paying 2 light to have the Shockland enter untapped. Next I cast Chromatic Lantern and tap all of my remaining mana to cast General Kudro of Drannith. I use the General's ETB to exile the creature in Ruben's graveyard and pass the turn to him.
Ruben plays a Forest and casts Occam Adversary for 2 mana, given that Phil controls a green permanent. Ruben scries 1 with his Path of Ancestry, keeping the card on top of his library where it is, and passes the turn.
Phil plays a Snow-Covered Forest and casts Thought Vessel. Next he taps out to cast Return to Dust, exiling both Martin's and my Sol Rings. Phil then ends his turn.
I play Myriad Landscape, causing the rest of the table to mill a card, and cast Season of Growth. This forces my opponents to mill another card, and I pass to Alex.
I start my turn by playing Marsh Flats, and then cast one of my commanders, Trynn, Champion of Freedom. This triggers General Kudrow's ability, allowing me to exile another card from Ruben's graveyard, and I then move to combat. Here I attack Phil with the General, dealing him 3 damage, and move to my post-combat main phase. I pay 1 life, sacrifice my fetch land to put Blood Crypt into play tapped, and proceed to my end step. Trynn's ability triggers, making me a 1/1 human soldier token, which in turn triggers Kudrow's ability once more. I exile the Vivian in Phil's graveyard this way, and pass the turn.
Ruben begins his turn by moving straight to combat, attacking me with his Elf Warrior. Unable to block, I take 2 damage, and Ruben draws a card of their ability. In his second main phase, Ruben plays a Swamp and casts Elvish Archdruid. He scries 1, leaving the top card of his library where it is, and ends his turn.
Phil plays Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, and casts his commander, Chulane, Teller of Tales. With nothing more to do, he passes to Martin.
I play Crozen Verge, milling everyone else for 1, and pass the turn.
I play Battlefield Forge and cast Frontline Medic. This triggers General Kudrow, allowing me to exile a card from Phil's graveyard, and I then move to combat. Here I attack Ruben with Kudrow and my soldier, and Phil with Trynn, and neither player declares any blocks. Ruben takes 5 and Phil takes 4, and I move to my end step. I create another human soldier, exile a card from Ruben's graveyard, and end my turn.
Ruben starts his turn by casting his commander, Nath of the Gilt-Leaf. Next he plays Evolving Wilds, sacrifices it in order to put a forest into play tapped, and passes to Phil.
In his turn, Phil casts Phantasmal Image, having the illusion enter as a copy of Ruben's Elvish Archdruid. He then moves to combat, dealing Martin 2 damage with Chulane, and passes the turn. Martin responds to this by sacrificing his Myriad Landscape, searching his library for 2 planes, and putting them into play tapped. This mills the rest of us for 2, and Martin moves to his turn.
I play a forest, forcing everyone else to mill 1, and cast my commander, Siona, Captain of the Pyleus. My opponents each mill a card, I scry the top card of my library to the bottom, and then look at the top 7 cards of my library. I put Chomano's Blessing into my hand, and then cast Shielded by Faith, targeting my commander. For those of you that don't know, Siona and Shielded by Faith can make infinite tokens together, which would mill all of my opponent's libraries out thanks to my Altar of the Brood. Unfortunately for me though, Phil responds to the aura by casting Mana Drain, ending my combo before it even begins.
Good job, Phil.
I draw a card from Season of Growth, given that I targeted a creature I control with a spell, and with a tear in my eye, end my turn.
I play Myriad Landscape and then move to combat. Here I attack Ruben with all of my creatures, all of whom gain Indestructible thanks to Frontline Medic's ability. Ruben blocks the Medic with Nath and Kudrow with his adversary, taking 8 damage from my unblocked creatures. With nothing more to do, I move to my end step, creating a 1/1 human soldier with Trynn. I exile Martin's game-winning combo piece with Kudrow's ability, and pass to Ruben.
Nath's ability triggers in Ruben's upkeep, and Ruben chooses for Alex to discard a card at random. This triggers Nath's other ability, creating Ruben a 1/1 Elf Warrior token, and Ruben taps out to cast Siphon Mind. Alex responds to this by sacrificing 2 of his human warrior tokens to General Kudrow's ability, destroying Nath in this way. Siphon Mind then resolves, Phil, Alex and I each discard a card, and Ruben draws 3. Not yet finished, Ruben plays Tainted Wood and taps his Elvish Archdruid to create 3 green mana. He uses 2 of this to cast Golgari Signet, and the remaining 1 to cast Llanowar Elves. Happy with his board state, Ruben passes the turn, and Phil responds to this by casting Illidomri's Call. He searches his library for Grazalak's Illithid Scholar, puts the Mind Flayer into his hand, and proceeds to his turn.
Phil creates 3 colourless mana in his pre-combat main phase thanks to Mana Drain, one of which he used to help cast the Grazalaks he just tutored for. Next he moves to combat, attacking Martin with his commander and me with both of his 2/2 elves. Not wanting Phil to benefit from more Chulane triggers, which he would get by recasting any creatures that he returns to his hand with Grazalect, neither Martin nor I block. Martin takes 2, I take 4, and Phil moves to his second main phase. Here he taps his Elvish Archdruid to cast Growing Rites of Itlamok, looking at the top 4 cards of his library with the enchantments ETB. He reveals Elvish Mystic, puts the Druid into his hand, and then casts him. Chulane's ability triggers, Phil draws, and casts Green Sun Zenith where X is 1. He puts Noble Hierarch into play this way, draws from Chulane, and finally finished, moves to his end step. Growing Rites of Itlamok then transforms into Itlamok, Cradle of the Sun, and Phil ends his turn.
I start my turn by casting Dream Pod Druid, milling each of my opponents for 1 and scrying 1. I keep the top card of my library where it is and cast Chomano's Blessing, giving my Druid protection from white. This creates me a 1/1 human soldier token thanks to Siona, and I draw a card of Season of Growth. Ruben, Phil and Alex each mill 2 cards, and I then play a Plains, milling them all once again.
Who knew that Celestial Auras could mill so effectively?
I know, right? Not yet finished, I cast Open the Armory, searching my library for Rancor. I put the aura into my hand and then cast it, targeting Phil's Elvish Visionary. The elves, when this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice its effect triggers, and rather pleased with my big brain play, I pass to Alex.
Martin creates a 1/1 Sapling token in my upkeep thanks to Dream Pod Druid, milling everyone other than him for 1. He scries 1, keeping the top card of his library where it is, and I play Bright Climb Pathway. Moving to combat, I attack Phil with all of my indestructible creatures, and Phil blocks General Kudrow with Chulane. He takes 10 damage from unblocked humans, lowering his life total by a reasonable amount, and I proceed to my end step. Here I create a 1/1 human soldier, exiling Phil's Phantasmal Image, and then sacrifice my Myriad Landscape. I put a single swamp into play tapped, given that Martin milled the other basic swamp that I run, and I pass the turn.
I make a Sapling in Ruben's upkeep, forcing everyone other than me to mill a card. I don't bother scrying given that I know what's on top of my library, and Ruben plays a swamp. Next Ruben recasts his commander, scrying 1 with Path of Ancestry. He keeps the top card of his deck where it is, casts Aestheticism, and ends his turn.
Martin makes a Sapling in Phil's upkeep, and everyone other than Martin mills a card. Next, Phil casts Zendikar Resurgent, moves to combat, and attacks Martin with Lanoir Elves. Martin declares no blocks, taking 2 damage, and Phil draws a card thanks to Grazilex. In his second main phase, Phil plays a Forest and casts Stonecloaker. This draws him a card from his Resurgence, followed by a second card from Chulane, and Phil puts Temple of Enlightenment into play with his commander's ability. He scries 1, keeping the top card of his library where it is, and in a bizarre turn of events, exiles a card from my graveyard with his Gargoyle's ETB.
Oh, how the turntables.
Phil then returns Stonecloaker to his hand with the creature's other ETB, and then recasts it. He draws 2 cards, puts Selesnya Sanctuary into play, and returns Bountiful Promenade to his hand with the land's ETB. Phil exiles another card from my graveyard, returns the Gargoyle to his hand, and, you guessed it, recasts the Winged Statue for a 3rd time. He draws twice, replays the Bountiful Promenade, exiles a card from my graveyard, and bounces the Gargoyle to his hand. Phil repeats this process once more, this time putting an island into play and exiling the Rancor in Martin's graveyard. He returns Stonecloaker to his hand for a final time, and passes to Martin.
I make yet another Sapling in my upkeep, milling each of my opponents for 1, and cast Skullclamp. Ruben, Phil and Alex each mill once more, and I then move to combat. Here I attack Alex with my Druid, which he is unable to block given that it has protection from white. He takes 2 damage, and I proceed to my second main phase, where I attach my Skullclamp to one of my Saplings. The Mushroom dies, drawing me 2 cards, and I repeat this process once again. I draw 2 more cards, showing Phil that he isn't the only one with the ability to draw lots of cards, and cast Umbral Mystic. Everyone other than me mills 1 again, and I use my remaining mana to cast Spectral Steel, enchanting Siona. This produces a human soldier, everyone else mills 2 cards, and I draw from Season of Growth. Out of mana, I pass the turn.
Martin makes a saproling, mills the rest of us for 1 in my upkeep, and scries 1. He keeps the top card of his library where it is, and I cast Collective Effort. I tap one of my tokens to escalate the spell, choosing to destroy Zendikar Resurgence and put a +1/+1 counter on each of my creatures. Phil responds to this by countering the spell with Negate, and I move swiftly to combat. Here I attack Phil with all of my remaining creatures, and Phil responds by casting March of the Multitudes, where X is 7. He makes 7 1/1 soldiers with lifelink, blocks each of my attacking creatures with a soldier, and gains 4 life. Not to be deterred, I move to my post-combat main phase, where I cast my other commander, Silvar, Devourer of the Free. Unable to do anything else, I move to my end step, where I create a 1/1 human. I use General Kudro's ability to exile the Elish Norn Grand Cenobite from Phil's graveyard, and end my turn.
I make a saproling and make everyone mill in Ruben's upkeep, and Ruben forces Phil to discard a card at random with his commander's ability. This creates him a 1/1 elf warrior, and Ruben then casts Burglar Rat. Both Phil and I discard a card, generating Ruben 2 more elves, but Alex fails to discard given that he has no cards in hand.
Small victories.
Not yet finished, Ruben casts Farhaven Elf, searching his library for a forest and putting it into play tapped. Next he casts Casualties of War, destroying Zendikar Resurgent, Itlamog Cradle of the Sun, and Chulane, as well as my Skull Clamp. Ruben then uses his remaining mana to cast Geth's Grimoire, which he probably should have done before casting Burglar Rats, and passes to Phil.
In Phil's upkeep, Martin makes what feels like the millionth saproling of the game, milling the rest of us for 1. Phil then plays Horizon Canopy and casts Finale of Devastation, where X is 13. I respond to this by sacrificing my frontline medic, countering the spell unless Phil pays 3 more mana. Really wanting the tutoring to resolve, Phil taps 3 of his mana dorks and searches library for Craterhoof Behemoth. This gives all of his creatures +9/+9 and trample with the Craterhoof's ETB, followed by a further +13/+13 from Finale of Devastation.
Now that is definitely the scariest power buff I've ever seen.
Moving to combat, Phil attacks Martin with all 3 of his soldiers, me with Noble Hierarch and Grazilex, and Ruben with Craterhoof Behemoth. Regardless of how Martin and I block, we both die, and Ruben blocks the Behemoth coming at him with Occame Adversary. This triggers Grazilex's ability, and Phil chooses to return the Gargantuan Beast to his hand for later use. Martin and I both take lethal damage. Phil gains 69 from his lifelinking soldiers.
Nice.
And Phil draws 2 cards for his Mind Flayer's other ability. Satisfied that he has the game all but won, Phil passes the turn.
Ruben, by the look of the gods, makes Phil discard Craterhoof Behemoth with Nath's trigger, creating him a 1/1 elf warrior in the process. Next he casts Coat of Arms, watching the sweat drip from Phil's brow as he does so, followed by Delirium Skeins. This forces Phil and Ruben to each discard 3 cards, creating 3 more elves for Ruben, and buffing all but one of his creatures by a further +3/+3.
Silly Burglar Rat, you shouldn't be here.
Moving to combat, Ruben attacks Phil with all of his elves, which each have +14/+14. This deals Phil more than lethal damage, winning Ruben the game to literally everybody's surprise and delight. Well, that's it for another game. I hope that you enjoyed seeing victory snatched from Phil's grasp by that perfectly timed play of Coat of Arms. Don't forget that you can help to support the channel in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. And if you really like us, then consider checking out our Patreon page, where you can find rewards such as custom tokens and playmats for as little as $1 a month. That's all for now though, we'll see you next time, stay awesome!